This series is sponsored by War Thunder. Last week, the Second French Empire was at its peak. France's armies defeated Austria and unified the Italian peninsula. Princes, kings, and emperors paid court to Napoleon III. His globe-spanning empire was tied together by the brand new Suez Canal. France's economy and culture were the envy of the world, and it was all governed from the most magnificent capital city in Europe. Today, we're going to watch it all fall apart. Because this is the downfall of Napoleon III and his Second French Empire. On July 3rd, 1866, the Kingdom of Prussia decisively defeated the Austrian Empire and its allies at the Battle of Sadowa. Though this was largely the work of Prussia's minister-president Otto von Bismarck, Napoleon III had his own hand in the catastrophe. Ever since the emperor failed to secure an alliance with Austria, he believed war between it and Prussia would weaken both sides to France's benefit. He encouraged the Austrians to fight by implying he might intervene on their behalf. And he encouraged the Prussians to fight by helping them secure an alliance with the Italians, who still wanted Venetia for themselves. The Habsburgs promised Bonaparte the left bank of the Rhine if they won. The Prussians tried offering Luxembourg, Belgium, or the French-speaking provinces of Switzerland. But the emperor ended up with nothing after Prussia refused his counter-demand, which was to give him the left bank of the Rhine just like Austria offered. Napoleon's plans were totally ruined by Austria's defeat. At Emperor Franz Joseph's request, Napoleon proposed a peace plan in which Austria would cede Venetia to Italy, allow limited expansion of Prussia in North Germany, and to form a so-called Third Germany by unifying all of the other German states. But since Napoleon's armies were all occupied in Algeria and Mexico, the French emperor was in no position to enforce it. When the Prussians called Napoleon's bluff, he was forced into a humiliating climb down. Instead, Austria lost Venetia to Italy and was kicked out of German affairs entirely. Prussia consolidated all of North Germany into its brand new North German Confederation, and with Austria gone, dominated the remaining free states to the south. As one French politician put it was France who was defeated at Sadowa. Recent historiography has discovered another cause of Austria's defeat. Using cutting-edge science, it's been discovered that Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph was not subscribed to the CallMeEzekiel YouTube channel. Meanwhile, Prussia's King Wilhelm and Minister-President Otto von Bismarck were both subscribed viewers. Now, they're preparing to lead the subscribed viewers on their final offensive to unite all CallMeEzekiel enjoyers into a single glorious empire. So consider this your warning, unsubscribed viewers. Join the empire willingly by subscribing to this channel and hitting the notification bell right now, or you're going to get crushed like the Austrians at Sadowa. Following their victory, the Prussians listened to French diplomats beg for a consolation prize, such as the Rhineland or parts of the Low Countries. At one point, the French put their interest partitioning Belgium in writing, an incriminating document the Prussians held onto for later. Eventually, Bismarck agreed to let France buy tiny Luxembourg from the Dutch, but when the purchase became public, all of Germany was outraged. Bismarck then betrayed their agreement by opposing the sale. At an international conference held in May 1867, the great powers agreed that Prussia's soldiers had to leave the duchy and dismantle its fortifications, but Luxembourg would remain Dutch. French isolation was truly starting to bite. With Austria defeated, Russia a close Prussian ally, and Great Britain as distrustful as ever, Italy seemed the last possible partner for France. The kingdom's condition for an alliance was evacuating French troops from Rome, so the city could be taken for Italy's capital. The French duly left in December 1866. But when Republican revolutionaries invaded the next year, a waffling French emperor sent troops back in to defend the Pope. In the end, all this accomplished was outraging French Catholics and Italian nationalists alike. Napoleon III may have never been a first-rate diplomat, but this level of incompetence was unusual. Much of it can be explained by the death of his ablest advisor Morny in 1865, and the emperor's own rapidly deteriorating health. By this point, he had difficulty walking, riding, and could hardly eat or sleep. He suffered heart attacks in 1864 and 67, needed opium-based painkillers to sleep, and could sometimes be heard calling the names of long-dead companions. So as the Second French Empire entered its period of greatest danger, its leaders were asleep on the throne. Maybe Napoleon III could have gotten some energy by playing this series' sponsor, War Thunder. I cannot thank War Thunder enough for sponsoring this whole series, but you can help by signing up to play for free via the links in the description and pinned comment. New and returning players on PC and console who haven't played in the last 6 months also get a free bonus pack with multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive Eagle of Valor decorator, 100,000 silver lions, and 7 days of premium account. Thank you, War Thunder, for making in-depth history like this free for everyone. Emperor Napoleon III once said, "Morny is an Orleanist, Plan is a Republican, I am a socialist, and Eugenie is a legitimist. Only Persigny is a Bonapartist, and he's mad." Though in reality, the emperor was sympathetic to every one of these positions. His attempts to reconcile them would lead to the creation of the liberal empire. And their advocates became featured on our brand new sticker sheets, featuring a young Empress Eugenie as a matador, Napoleon III huffing copium, and the emperor holding Plan down as a balloon, so he doesn't fly off into the stratosphere. We also have an extra beefy sticker of a thoroughly stuffed cousin Plan. For you real Plan fans. Links to these stickers and the whole Napoleon III collection are in the description. Beginning in 1860, Napoleon III gradually assigned new powers to his rubber stamp parliament, slowly transforming it into a real legislative body. Press censorship was relaxed and public assembly tolerated. Compulsory public education was implemented for children and made available for adults and women. French workers were allowed to strike and later to unionize. All of this was part of Eugenie and Louis Napoleon's plan to retire when their son, Prince Imperial Lulu, turned 18. Though they did plan for Lulu to assume the throne as a constitutional monarch, the emperor liberalized France much faster than expected. Between the loss of Morny and his own failing health, liberalizing quickly seemed the best way to ease the burden. But one project the emperor still made time for was reforming Algeria, a colony that had long captivated him. French Algeria was first established by the Bourbons and expanded by the Orleans as something of a vanity project. By the time Napoleon took power, the army was spending considerable resources forcing its people off their land to make way for French settlement, and suppressing the uprisings this inevitably caused. But Napoleon III had a different vision, declaring, "I am, after all, as much the emperor of the Arabs as I am emperor of the French." In 1863, after an abortive attempt putting Plan in charge, the emperor prepared to settle the colonial infighting by limiting European colonization to the coast. He hoped this would reconcile the Algerians to French civilization, transforming the colony from a source of costly rebellions into one of economic and military strength. But the army and colonists hated the restrictions, while the Algerians did not want modernization, which would mean the destruction of their traditional ways of life. The situation was made worse when, starting in 1867, the colony was struck by waves of natural disasters, killing up to 300,000 Algerians. In the end, opposition from colonists and the army successfully stopped Napoleon III from protecting Algerian interests. When the Imperial Land Survey was completed in 1870, all of the best land went to the French, and Algeria's tribal system was broken up. Many Algerians were forced to become migrant laborers in the French colonies and even the mainland. Despite the emperor's intentions, French Algeria continued to be run only for the colonists' benefit. At its height, over 11% of Algeria's population would be French. However, whereas Algeria at least turned out well for the colonists, the intervention in Mexico was a disaster for everyone. The French army and treasury were stretched to their limit to provide tens of thousands of soldiers every year to protect Maximilian's throne. The Mexican emperor lost what little support he had by spending lavishly on an elaborate court life, and by governing Mexico as a liberal. The church and aristocracy who invited him hated the reforms, while Mexico's own liberals, who he had just overthrown, would not support a foreign emperor. There was simply no constituency in Mexico for a liberal autocrat like Napoleon III. Then, in 1865, the reunited States of America threatened to force France and Maximilian out of the country. This was the last straw for the emperor, who regretfully informed his Mexican counterpart that the French army would soon be leaving, and advising Maximilian to abdicate and return with them. Maximilian I chose to stay and hold the throne with the 10,000 men still loyal to him. Inevitably, the Mexican emperor was defeated, captured at Querétaro, and executed in June 1867. So ended France's adventure in Mexico. Back in France, the elections of 1869 showed how unstable Napoleon III's regime was becoming. Only 4.4 million people voted for the government, 3.3 million people voted for the opposition. Increasingly violent strikes ravaged the nation, while the army lost all respect for its emperor. At the very least, few people were protesting the empire itself. Most were demanding reforms. By 1870, even the staunchest Bonapartists were agreeing with them. It was time to finalize the transition to constitutional monarchy. A plebiscite was held on May 8, 1870, to implement a new constitution that would expand the power of the elected lower house at the expense of the emperor and his appointed upper house. In a ringing endorsement of the liberal empire, it passed with over 7 million votes. Émile Olivier, a liberal Republican who had grown closer to the Bonapartists, would serve as France's first de facto prime minister. The imperial phoenix was again reborn. By all accounts, it seemed to have a bright future ahead. The political crisis was resolved, economy humming along, and though isolated, France had no pending foreign policy crises. On June 30th, First Minister Olivier announced, "In whatever direction we look abroad, we find no pressing problems. There has never been a time in history when the prospects of peace in Europe have looked better." 3 weeks later, the empire was at war, and within a year, it would cease to exist. In 1870, Spain selected Prince Leopold, a Catholic cousin of Prussia's King Wilhelm, to fill the vacant Spanish throne. Bismarck pushed to coronate Leopold quickly to extend German influence and humiliate France. Instead, word of the plot leaked, and Europe was outraged. Since the Sadowa and Luxembourg debacles, the French people were spoiling for a fight with Prussia. But Napoleon III knew the French army wasn't ready yet. Close study had taught the emperor that Prussia had the most modern army in Europe, while France lost its edge fighting only colonial conflicts for over a decade. Despite its larger population, French reliance on professional troops meant it fielded a much smaller army equipped with outdated weapons. Back in the autocratic days of the 1850s, the legislature would have rubber-stamped whatever army reform the emperor wanted. But now in the liberal empire, the sick Louis Napoleon lacked the energy to play politics with an empowered legislature eager to assert its independence, or rein in disrespectful generals unwilling to adapt to modern warfare. In 1868, the French legislature finally passed a limited conscription law to raise an army of 800,000 soldiers, but that was still short of Prussia's universal conscription. And later, just to assert its independence, Parliament voted to cut tens of thousands of soldiers from the rolls. Just a few weeks before the conflict would break out, a proposal to raise the army's budget was defeated. Short of war, Napoleon III tried satisfying French public opinion by demanding Prussia's King Wilhelm withdraw Leopold's candidature. It turned out Wilhelm didn't want war either, and agreed. But the French people didn't think this was enough, forcing their emperor to demand a guarantee that no member of Wilhelm's House of Hohenzollern would ever sit upon the Spanish throne, and to apologize for even trying. Obviously, the Prussian king said no to both. The crisis should have ended there, but Bismarck intervened by releasing an edited copy of these events to make it seem like France's ambassador and Prussia's king insulted each other. Frenchmen and Germans alike were outraged and demanded war. Many key advisors and the emperor himself wanted to back down, perhaps through a peace conference, but the war party, which included Eugenie, considered that too humiliating. Napoleon III at least hoped he could find allies, but Austria and Russia were uninterested, and Bismarck made sure the British stayed out by showing them the documents France's diplomats had signed stating their interest in annexing Belgium, a key British interest. Italy again named Rome as its price, but preserving public opinion was the whole reason the emperor was about to declare war. He couldn't risk upsetting French Catholics. So on July 18, 1870, the Second French Empire declared war without a single ally. Since this made Prussia the defender, every South German state rallied to its side. For the fourth and final time, the Second French Empire was at war. What were France's war goals? To capture Berlin? North German regime change? Dismantling the North German Confederation entirely? No one, not even the emperor, knew. Despite that, and in chronic pain from his kidney stones, Napoleon III chose to lead French armies himself. Enthusiastically accompanying him was the 14-year-old Prince Imperial Lulu. When Imperial father and son arrived at the army at Metz, they discovered France's mobilization was a disaster. Of the expected 385,000 men, there were only 200,000, mostly without weapons or supplies. The other French army gathering to the south wasn't much better. Aside from a brief offensive to take German Saarbrücken, both French armies assumed a defensive posture to await reinforcements. This allowed the Prussians, whose own mobilization was similarly messy, to seize the initiative, attacking both French armies and routing them. These sudden twin defeats precipitated a political crisis in Paris. As crowds took to the streets, Empress Eugenie forced Prime Minister Olivier out in a vote of no confidence, replacing him with General Charles Cousin Montauban, the Comte de Palikau. Napoleon, perhaps wisely, passed command of his retreating army to General Bazaine, but Bazaine couldn't stop the Prussians from catching up and mauling his rearguard at the Moselle River. Depressed by defeat, and in agony from his kidney stones, the emperor took to exposing himself to enemy fire. But all that accomplished was getting one of his aides-de-camp killed and 2 others wounded. Failing to kill himself, the French Emperor and Prince Imperial rode to join the new army gathering near Paris under General McMahon. They found under McMahon a force of 130,000 properly armed and supplied soldiers. With the Prussians stretching their own supply lines, McMahon could have very realistically counterattacked and reversed the course of the war. Instead, with the chain of command confused by the emperor's presence without actually being in command, everyone argued about what to do next. Eventually, Napoleon III called a decisive meeting. There, Cousin Plan gave the surprisingly reasonable advice that there was little Napoleon could do with the army, but he could still play a stabilizing role in Paris. The popular liberal General Trochu could be sent ahead as military governor to prevent any uprisings caused by the humiliating return. McMahon's army, meanwhile, could dig into strong defensive positions around the city and beat back the Prussians, who by then would be at the very limits of their supply lines. In the words of this Bonaparte prince, who abandoned his own men in the Crimea, "What the devil? If the empire must fall, let us at least fall like men." Trochu secured the way to Paris, but when Eugenie and Palikau found out what happened, they were horrified and demanded the emperor stay with McMahon. They wanted the pair to rescue Bazaine, who was defeated in another battle and now surrounded at Metz. The arguing continued until August 22nd, when Bazaine informed McMahon he would try to break out and rendezvous. McMahon and the emperor finally marched, but after it became clear the breakout wasn't happening, they had to maneuver away from the larger German armies. Orders from the capital then arrived to relieve Bazaine anyway. It was obvious this would end in disaster, but the emperor was too resigned to intervene, and McMahon felt duty-bound to obey. At the very least, Napoleon sent the Prince Imperial to the Belgian border, where he could cross to safety at a moment's notice. On August 30th, the Prussians and their allies caught McMahon's army close to the Meuse River and drove them north away from Metz. Eventually, McMahon settled his remaining 110,000 soldiers and the emperor at the fortress of Sedan. They did not know they were still within striking distance of 250,000 Germans. While McMahon argued with his generals, the Germans surrounded his army and began their bombardment on September 1st. As his army and empire were blown to bits around him, Napoleon III, certainly in agony from his kidney stones, rode around the fortress hoping a stray shell might finally kill him. Instead, a single shell killed 2 of his officers while miraculously leaving Napoleon himself unharmed. Eventually, the French emperor came to his senses and begged his generals to surrender. But one by one, they either passed responsibility or outright refused. Finally, the emperor took matters into his own hands. In Napoleon's own words, "My heart was broken, but my conscience was clean." When a German officer arrived under a flag of truce to formally request the army's surrender, he was astonished to find the French emperor waiting for him. The Germans did not realize Napoleon III was with the French army this whole time. Prussia's King Wilhelm and Minister-President Bismarck were also at Sedan. Napoleon met with Bismarck first, who he informed that he only had the power to surrender his army. The rest of France was out of his control. Then, King and Emperor met to formalize the surrender of Napoleon's 90,000 men and the Emperor himself. The French emperor was treated remarkably well by his Prussian captors. He was kept at the castle of Wilhelmshohe, which had once been home to his uncle Jerome as King of Westphalia. The castle was still full of Napoleonica, including a portrait of his mother Hortense. Prussia's Queen Augusta took personal charge of the emperor's comfort, sending her own servants and private chef to take care of him. Napoleon's health seemed to improve considerably in captivity. He was reported to be looking considerably younger and enjoy horseback riding again. The stones which had so troubled him must have finally broken up. Back in Paris, the imperial music stopped. General Trochu, who had been appointed military governor to protect the regime, defected to the Republicans. Crowds surrounded Eugenie at the Tuileries Palace. With the help of the Austrian and Italian ambassadors, as well as her American dentist, the Empress was smuggled out of the palace and onto a boat, on which she made the stormy Channel crossing. Safely on the English Isle of Wight, Eugenie was informed that Lulu had already escaped into Belgium. Mother and son were reunited in Dover that evening. In those last days of empire, Bismarck made a unique offer to Napoleon. The Republican government replacing Napoleon was refusing to make peace because the newly formed German Empire was demanding the handover of France's historic provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. Bismarck offered the emperor his throne back if he would sign, but Napoleon III said no. He would not betray France, even if it was a republic. In March 1870, the French and German governments finally made peace, and Louis Napoleon was released from captivity, a private individual once again. He sought refuge in England, whose queen and people welcomed him back with open arms. As the former emperor entertained dreams that his empire might be restored, cousin Plan Plan, now serving as a deputy in the new French parliament, showed up to propose another coup. But the emperor was old by this point, and again tormented by bladder problems. His doctors planned 3 surgeries in early January 1873. The first 2 operations were as successful as could be expected, but the last one had to be cancelled on account of Napoleon's deteriorating condition. Fading in and out of consciousness, the former emperor asked the whereabouts of his son Lulu, who at the time was a British Army cadet, and of Sedan, at one point asking, "We weren't cowards there, were we?" The Empress, Prince Imperial, and a priest were all summoned. Eugenie arrived and the priest issued last rites, but by the time Lulu arrived, he was informed that his father had passed half an hour earlier. So ends the life of Napoleon III, last reigning emperor of the French. It wasn't a proper empire, but we had a devil of a good time. That's how Fleury, Napoleon III's ambassador to Italy and Russia, remembered the Second French Empire. But what can we make of this man, Louis Napoleon, and the empire he built? Today, Napoleon III is mostly remembered for the calamitous final year of his reign. 1871 saw the destruction of his empire and the foundation of Germany's. A ruler must always bear responsibility for what happens during his reign, but much of the disaster can also be attributed to bad luck. In those final years, Napoleon III was very ill, without his best advisors, and was forced into a war against some of the most dangerous men in Europe. Napoleon III was not a man of war like the first. His were not the continent-shattering clashes of his uncle, but short conflicts of a limited nature. Napoleon announced over and over again that the empire stands for peace, and he mostly meant it. Toward the end of his reign, Napoleon III planned to write a novel. It would be the story of Monsieur Benoit, a man who left France in 1847 and returned in 1864. The story would follow Benoit as he is repeatedly awestruck by the incredible transformation France experienced under the emperor's guidance. Whereas once there was political unrest and rebellion, now there was peace and prosperity. Benoit would be amazed to see a nation suddenly enriched by railroads, telegraphs, sanitation, and welfare. Though Napoleon never finished the novel, the outline alone tells us a lot about how he hoped to be remembered. The Third French Republic, however, preferred to forget his reign entirely. It did nothing to acknowledge the death of its recent emperor, and practically removed the whole Second Empire from its history books. It was remarkably ungrateful. Though defeated and humiliated, the France Napoleon III left behind was still one of the greatest powers on the continent. Its global empire was second only to Great Britain's, its cultural influence and technological advancement still the envy of the world. When the Prussians forced a supposedly crippling 5 billion franc indemnity on the Third Republic, Napoleon III left it such a powerful economy that they were able to pay it off in just 3 years. By focusing on Napoleon III's mediocre military record, all of his true achievements in the realms of economy, industry, diplomacy, and culture are totally lost. Napoleon III led France into 2 decades of stability, expansion, and prosperity. In the final decade, in a manner comparable to America's George Washington, the emperor voluntarily returned considerable power to his people in the name of his liberal ideals. And, in his final moments as sovereign, When tested by the Bismarckian devil with a deal to betray France and regain his throne, the Emperor of the French kept his honor. One need only look at the city of Paris, global trade, culture, or a map of Europe, Africa, and Asia to witness the legacy of the Second French Empire, and to know the world would be unrecognizable without it or its emperor. And that's Napoleon III and his Second French Empire. Leave a champagne-popping bottle emoji in the comments as a secret message to all of the other fond rememberers of the Second French Empire who made it this far too. Don't forget to check out this series' awesome sponsor, War Thunder, via the links in the description and pinned comment. Not only will new and returning players on PC and console get a free bonus pack, signing up with our link helps show War Thunder how awesome they are for making this series possible. You'll also find links to where you can pick up your Second French Empire stickers and the whole Napoleon III collection. I'll see you in the next one. This series would be impossible without the help of our generous supporters, including our Into Space supporters, Archmagos Excellentia, Duke Nelson, Encore Financials, Equinox, Feline Man, GS Rogers, G Money, Josiah, Lethiel Viriath, Pater, and Swiss Cheeses.